Why are most people still ignoring Bitcoin, even though over the last 15 years, it's been the best performing asset to exist? In this video, I want to go in depth into this topic. Let's get started. One of the reasons why I think the people who have wealth are still ignoring Bitcoin is that they're still trusting their financial advisors to give them the advice on what to invest in. Their financial advisors don't quite understand Bitcoin. They think they do. They tell you that they've studied Bitcoin, even though all they know about Bitcoin is a few of the memes like, oh, it's too volatile, it uses too much energy, it doesn't have any physical form. They haven't spent the time actually learning what money is, and they haven't spent the time learning how Bitcoin differs from stocks and real estate. I've shown you these formulas before, but when you have stocks, you have certain formulas that you can follow to value them. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out how much cash flow the stock, the company that you're buying, is going to produce for you. So in this case, we have number one with stocks, we have discounted cash flows. You are just trying to find the net present value of all of the cash flows that the company is getting over the next few years, next few decades, however long you want to analyze them for. Your goal is to bring those cash flows over the next decade, 2 decades, 5 decades to the present. And you're trying to incorporate the time value of money when you're doing so. What the analysts are doing is they're just calculating a number and they're trying to predict what the value of the company will be in the future. This is all speculative. You have to remember that. You have to remember when financial analysts tell you that Bitcoin is speculative, ask them how they're valuing the stocks that they're telling you to buy. All of this is speculative. They don't know what the cash flows are going to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. They have no idea. They can guess, they can estimate, but they have no idea. So this is one of the formulas that they use. The second formula that they use, and keep in mind that this doesn't apply to Bitcoin because Bitcoin is not a business. Bitcoin's not a stock. So if you want to value Bitcoin like a stock, then you're going to get the wrong answers for any kind of formula that you use because Bitcoin doesn't provide you with cash flows. The next one here, comparing metrics, price to earnings. Bitcoin doesn't have earnings. So you're trying to use again the metrics that you would use to value a stock to value Bitcoin, to value money. I've gone through all of these metrics in a past video. I'll just link it in the description below so you can watch that whole video. You can go through all of the metrics. There's the enterprise value, there's the asset-based valuation. So what they do is they take the total assets minus the total liabilities and they give you the book value. There's the liquidation value, all of these different multiples. And then with real estate, you have the income approach. What your goal is with real estate and stocks is to earn a cash flow. You're trying to get cash flows from whatever you're owning. So let's say you own a company. Why would you own it if you're not getting paid for owning it? When you value a stock, you're trying to figure out if those cash flows are worth you putting your money into the company. That's your goal as an analyst who's looking at stocks. With real estate, you're doing pretty much the same thing because what you're doing is you're trying to see how much income this property is going to generate over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, however long. And you're trying to look at the different metrics that you might use. You're trying to see what is worth putting your money into. So your goal is to find the best option for your money. And you use all these metrics to value the property that you're buying. None of these apply to Bitcoin because Bitcoin doesn't create cash flows. Bitcoin doesn't have rent. Bitcoin doesn't have a comparison. All Bitcoin are exactly the same. You don't have a Bitcoin number one versus Bitcoin number two versus Bitcoin number three. They're all the exact same. And the problem here is that financial advisors are still using these metrics to value Bitcoin. They're thinking, why should I buy this asset that doesn't have cash flows when I could buy stocks and real estate? When you try to look at Bitcoin from the perspective of a stock investor or from the perspective of a real estate investor, you're always going to be told that Bitcoin is worthless because it doesn't provide cash flows. So a lot of people over the next few years, the next few decades are going to get burned because they're going to listen to their financial advisor who has no idea what they're doing. They have no idea why they're telling this person not to buy Bitcoin. They don't know what the risks of Bitcoin are. They don't know where Bitcoin could go. They don't know what the use cases of Bitcoin are. They have no idea how to answer a lot of the questions when it comes to buying Bitcoin or not buying Bitcoin. If you're the decision maker for your family's wealth, I think that you should look at Bitcoin from a completely different perspective. Don't look at it from the perspective of your financial advisor. Your financial advisor makes money from selling you funds. Certain funds that they sell you will give them a certain amount of money. So don't look at it from their perspective. They don't make money if you buy Bitcoin in cold storage. Your goal should be to do the best thing for yourself. Your goal isn't to just blindly follow the advice of a financial advisor. Your goal isn't to blindly follow the advice of Warren Buffett. Your goal should be to do the best you can with the money that you have. Your goal should be to put your money into the best performing asset that you can find. If you want to learn about Bitcoin but you don't know where to start, I would highly recommend joining the school community. In the community, we have a bunch of courses, we have live sessions every single week. So join the community. You can learn everything at a much faster pace than the average person. And when we look at Bitcoin, we can see how much better it performs than everything else. For example, we have Bitcoin versus gold. In the last year, gold has outperformed Bitcoin slightly, but what about 2 years? Bitcoin's up 196% versus gold is up 60%. The S&P 500 is lagging behind both, which is very unfortunate because most people are putting their money into the S&P 500. So we have 78% total over the last 3 years for Bitcoin, 65% for gold, 43% over the last 4 years for Bitcoin, 81% for gold, and 41% for the S&P 500. But then when we get through this period, we can see how much bigger the returns are. We can see here 1,119% over the last 5 years for Bitcoin, 92% for gold, and 126% for the S&P 500. I know you may not have been around to experience these returns from Bitcoin, the 1,000%, 1,500%. I personally wasn't either, and that's perfectly fine. I'm okay with waiting because I know for a fact that over time, more and more people are going to buy Bitcoin because they have no allocation. If you truly want to understand why Bitcoin is so valuable, you have to compare it based on a certain set of criteria that we need money to have. I've gone through these criteria in another video. I'll link it in the description below, but we can see here that out of every single one of these assets, we have US dollar, which is money, gold, which was used for money for thousands of years, Bitcoin, and people like comparing Bitcoin to tulips for whatever reason, and they like comparing Bitcoin to trading cards. So if we take a look at all of these characteristics, we know that Bitcoin is way better than everything else. The only thing that Bitcoin isn't the best at is saleability, which is the ability to sell it anywhere in the world. I know over time that this is going to improve. As more companies, as more financial institutions figure out how Bitcoin works, I think they're going to want Bitcoin, and you'll be able to go to any part of the world and you'll be able to give away your Bitcoin for whatever currency is accepted in that area. I actually do think that over time, Bitcoin is going to be the form of money that everybody uses to exchange for goods and services. They're no longer going to price things in dollars. Most people don't quite understand the difference between a savings account and an investment. Bitcoin is a savings account. Most people in the world today use the US dollar and gold to save, and Bitcoin is a competing savings account. I think that's the best way to describe it. If your savings account doesn't have these characteristics, you can't pay for goods and services with that savings account. So what you have to do is you have to use something else to pay for those goods and services. Most people today are using stocks and real estate as their savings account, but if you think about it, you can't pay for an iPhone with a house. You can't pay for an iPhone with Apple stock. You have to give somebody US dollars because that's what they want. That's what the widely accepted form of money is, and it's widely accepted based on these characteristics. And now that you understand that Bitcoin is a form of money, you can start seeing why valuing a form of money based on discounted cash flows doesn't make sense. Bitcoin isn't going to provide cash flow because Bitcoin is the cash. Bitcoin is what the cash flow will be paid in. Bitcoin also doesn't provide an income in the form of rent because the rent will be paid in Bitcoin. We're going to use the Bitcoin as money. Like I said, most financial advisors don't understand this basic concept. Most of them have no idea that this is the case. They're still comparing Bitcoin to something like Apple stock or Google or Amazon. They still think that because you can't rent out your Bitcoin to earn a cash flow, that it's a scam. So because they don't understand how Bitcoin works, they're going to continue to tell you to put your money into stocks or into real estate or into bonds. I found this really cool website that allows you to compare different asset returns in terms of Bitcoin. So we can see here, the S&P 500 has done pretty well, gone straight up. It looks great when you just look at this chart. But if you look at it in terms of Bitcoin, it's almost irrelevant. It's almost not even there. We have to change it to a logarithmic chart to even make it fair for the S&P 500. And if we add the S&P 500 priced in Bitcoin, we can see here the red line is just going straight down. And this number is going to go lower and lower until the S&P 500 is priced at almost zero in terms of Bitcoin. At one point, one share of the S&P 500 could buy 10,500 Bitcoin. This was in 2010, right when Bitcoin's price had been established. If we move forward in time a little bit, we can see in 2013 the S&P 500 has gone from $1,000 to 1,800, but now you can only buy 1.5 Bitcoin with each share of the S&P 500. And the reason for this is that Bitcoin is a finite asset and most people have no allocation to it. Bitcoin's price is rising much faster than the S&P 500. So in 2013, one share of the S&P 500 could buy 1.5 Bitcoin. In 2018, it could only buy zero point 0.2 Bitcoin, which is a loss of about 85%. In 2021, it could only buy 0.07 Bitcoin. And in December of 2024, it was at 0.06 Bitcoin. Over time, this number is going to keep decreasing and decreasing, even though you might see that the S&P 500 is performing so well. Now, if we compare the Dow Jones, we see exactly the same thing. The price of the Dow Jones in terms of Bitcoin is decreasing over time. We can see the exact same thing for gold, the exact same for the median house price in the US. And we can also see that the median income in the US is decreasing in terms of Bitcoin and it's going to trend to zero forever. To put this into perspective, we can see here the median income in the US was 407,500 Bitcoin in 2010. So if you worked for Bitcoin as your annual salary, you'd be getting 407,500 Bitcoin worth of US dollars. At this time, Bitcoin was only worth 10 cents, but the median US income was $40,700. Over time, this number keeps falling and falling. And in September of 2024, you could buy 1.25 Bitcoin with the median US income. So if you listen to your financial advisor, you're going to be left behind. Your wealth in terms of Bitcoin is going to continue to decrease and decrease and decrease until you can no longer afford the amount of Bitcoin that you can buy today. So let's say you have $1 million portfolio. Today, you can use that portfolio to buy something like 12, 13 Bitcoin. But if you wait, at some point, you'll only be able to buy 5 Bitcoin. Then you'll only be able to buy 3 Bitcoin, then 1, then 0.5, then 0.3, 0.1. It'll keep decreasing. It'll keep trending to zero forever. The value of your portfolio in terms of US dollars will continue to rise forever, and your financial advisor will continue to tell you, oh, you're doing really well. In terms of US dollars, you're outperforming everyone. You're doing extremely well. But when you look at your portfolio in terms of Bitcoin, you're going to see the actual loss. You're going to see how much money you've lost because you got the wrong advice from somebody who doesn't completely understand Bitcoin. So why are most people ignoring Bitcoin? It's because they haven't put in the time to understand it. They don't understand that Bitcoin is a savings account and everything else is an investment. Why would you buy an investment with a lot more risk when you could buy a savings account with a lot less risk and higher returns? Once this clicks for a lot more people, we're going to see the price go much higher. Right now, most people are still ignoring Bitcoin because it's under $100,000. It seems like a joke to them. But when Bitcoin gets above $100,000 and it never comes back, then it goes to 200, then 300, then 400, then 500, then it goes to a million, and then 5 million. It's going to get harder and harder to ignore. At that point, those financial advisors won't be able to ignore Bitcoin anymore. And are you going to wait for Bitcoin to go to $5 million before you buy some? Or are you going to study it today when you can get it under $100,000? If you put $1,000 today into Bitcoin at $83,000 and you wait until Bitcoin goes to $5 million, that $1,000 is going to become over $60,000. So the amount of money that you would have made by putting $1,000 into Bitcoin would have been $59,000. Now think about if you put $10,000. That 10,000 would turn into 600,000. The problem is that a lot of wealthy people don't have cash just laying around. A lot of very wealthy people became wealthy because of real estate, and real estate takes up a lot of your time, energy, and effort. So these people don't have the time to research Bitcoin on their own. A lot of their resources are being used to repair the properties, they're being used for property taxes, and that money is going to disappear forever. When you have Bitcoin, you don't have to deal with any of that, and most of the wealthiest people in the world haven't figured this out yet. If most financial advisors don't understand Bitcoin today, then how do you expect people with no finance background to understand it? By the time they figure it out, like I said, Bitcoin's going to be much higher. I think you should buy Bitcoin before they figure it out, before they start advising their clients on buying Bitcoin. Every second that you put into understanding Bitcoin today before the masses is going to be so worth it. I think the best thing that you can do for yourself right now is learn how Bitcoin works. Read the book, The Bitcoin Standard. Read The Price of Tomorrow. Read that book behind me, The Internet of Money. That's an entire series. You can join the community. You can talk to people who are also trying to learn how Bitcoin works. You can join the live sessions. You can take the Bitcoin for Beginners course. Nobody can force you to learn about Bitcoin today. If you want to, you can take the time and you can keep waiting and waiting 4 or 5 years until Bitcoin's worth millions of dollars a coin. Once you start figuring it out, you start realizing how easy it is to save in Bitcoin. All you do is buy Bitcoin, store the Bitcoin safely, and relax. This is the best financial plan for 99% of people out there, and less than 1% of people have figured it out.